well, that's a new voice. How exciting. Okay, so what was I saying? I was saying what we're going to be doing. All right. So in order to be able to do these next couple of requirements in our bookmark manager project, we have to think a little bit about how we want to organize this. So there are a couple of problems we're going to have to solve. So let's think about some of these problems first. So let's put down here our classic application that deals with creating, reading, updating, deleting. So create, read, update, and delete. All right. Now, usually, you should be thinking about something that has to be created. All right. So let's put this in the context of the cat project that we've been working on, only because I'll be going back to it just a second. But you can always think of the bookmarks project as well. All right. And whenever we deal with applications like this, we think of application state. All right, this refers to the change in data that we have in our tables. So for example, if I create a cat, I'm going to change my application state. All right, I'm going to go from a certain number of rows in my cats table to one more. All right, I've changed the application state. Whereas a read doesn't change the application state. Read should only show me either a set of some set of data from my tables. It doesn't do anything destructive. It doesn't change anything. Update does, and so does delete. All right, they both change application state. So when we think about application state like this, we tend to think about, for example, a cat or a bookmark as resources. And this is the thing that we're going to be creating. We create a resource, or we read back a set of resources, or we update a resource. And so this is, we call this a resource, the thing in the table. All right, part of our part of our domain that we're working with. So in the cat book project, we are using cats as our main resource. In the bookmark manager project, you'll end up having bookmarks as a resource, comments as a resource, and potentially a couple other resources. All right, and there's usually some kind of one-to-one relationship with a certain resource and a model and a table. All right, the model is represented usually by some ORM, and then the table is in some kind of database. And the resource is what we describe it, all right? So, for example, a cat is the resource, the ORM would be the model cat, and the table would be the cats table. Now, the reason why I talk about a resource is because at the moment, if you have a look at maybe some of the routes that you've been designing in your application, you might have something like this. All right, or if it's cats or bookmarks. And this URL here is important in how we describe it. So some people might be tempted to write a URL that says something like get all cats, or make a URL that says like create a cat. And this you might think is more descriptive to sort of demonstrate what's actually happening. But the convention here is to use the HTTP verb the get or the post, in addition with the resource name. All right, so we're trying to apply some convention to this. So in the design of your web applications or any kind of application that handles requests, you want to think about what are your resources. So what are the tables that you need to be updating or reading? And what are the URLs that you need for your application to handle? So I don't want to see URLs like this. I want to see URLs based on resources that you want to update or change. So if it's bookmarks, it should be /bookmarks. If it's cats, it should be cats. If it's comments, it should be /comments, etc. All right, so you should always try and think about the resources and name your routes here accordingly. All right, and the HTTP verb will correspond with the action that is trying to happen here. So when you make a post request to cats, when people see this, they automatically know it's very likely, and it should be, they'll be expecting to create a cat resource. All right, so there will be something that adds to a database or adds some data storage somewhere, something that represents a cat. So we can try and map these accordingly. So if we go back to the create, when we use our Express app to handle requests, when we want to create a resource, we're going to make a post request to, and if it's a resource, it'll be the resource name. In this case, it's going to be cats. If we want to read all of them out, we'll make a post request. Sorry, we won't make a post request. We'll make a get request. As you expected, to /cats. Now, if you want to read maybe just one particular cat, we'll still make a get request. It's still a read, but it's still going to be the resource name cats, but we're also going to pass it an ID. And I'll talk about what that colon means in a second. I'm going to tell my application, I just want to have a look at one cat in particular. Now, the thing that is identifying all different rows of my table is the ID column. So I should be able to make a request to my application to say, I want to show me this one cat, all right? If I want to update, I'm going to send a put request. And I want to update a specific cat record. So in the same way, I'm going to send it like this. Right, the colon indicates something that will change, something that's dynamic. And in the same way, a delete request. Send a delete request to /cats and give it a specific ID to find. So there's a convention behind this, all right? As you can see, there's a pattern. And the two things that change is going to be this part here, right? What is the HTTP verb that we use? And if it's a single item, we have to pass in an ID. By this way, we can organize quite cleanly the way that our application is going to handle these different requests. But if we think about this from a client-server relationship, right? So we'll zoom out a little bit. And we have our browser making requests and our application then handling them. There is data that we need to send across in the request, all right? So as we've been doing, we've been using forms to do post and get requests. So the first two have been quite straightforward because we haven't needed to pass any additional information so far. All right, these are the first two that we've done, these first two kinds of requests. Excuse me. Too much carbonated lemonade. We've been able to make a post request to our cats route. We've been able to make a get request in the same way. So we're not going to worry about this one for the moment. The second kind of get request using an ID, we don't need to worry about this for the moment. but we're going to do the next two, update and delete. Now I'm going to focus on delete because it's slightly quicker to do. So this is what I want to demonstrate, and this one here. How do we do this? Well, we need to find a way to make a request. At the moment, we've been using forms to make a GET or a POST request, but we need to make a request that can have as its HTTP method delete, and have as part of the request some information about the ID. We also clearly have to give it the right URL, so we have to go to something like cats, and then say, for example, we wanted to remove a cat from our table with an ID of, I don't know, 43, for example. This would be the kind of request we would want to make. All right, so this is from the browser side. We have to find a way to make this request. And our application, therefore, has to handle it. So we have to be able to have a delete route that extracts the ID from the request and then deletes it from the table. So this is the current task ahead of us, but we have two problems here. Problem number one, forms, HTML forms, can only submit a request as a GET or a POST. Problem number two is, how do we extract the ID from the request? All right, everyone with me so far? Let me just pause here for thoughts or questions. I've got a couple emoji reactions. Okay, cool, thank you. Just again, pausing here for any questions or thoughts about what I've covered so far, and specifically in addition to these two problems that we have to solve. Okay. So let's tackle number one first. Problem number one. Problem number one is our HTML form is quite basic, quite simple, and we can't get it to submit a delete request. So we can't just go ahead, go to our views page, and change this, for example, to a delete. This doesn't work. It would still just default to a POST request. All right, this would be the one I wanted to add in anyway. So we have to find a different way to do this. And to our rescue is an express dependency called method override. And this is what's going to help us solve problem number one. And the way this is going to work is we're actually going to essentially have a small hack. All right, what we're going to do is we're actually going to send this as a POST request, but we're going to add a little bit of middleware that says, let me get the right color up here, before it hits our main application, we're going to change the HTTP verb from post to delete. All right, so there's going to be a little thing here that we're going to add into our application that says, okay, if you detect a POST request coming in that's got some information that says, please change me, we're going to add some information that says this should be a delete request. So we're going to add data to the request. It's still going to have a post HTTP post verb, and it's still going to have the same URL, but we're going to add some data to it that says This really should be a delete request. And so when it makes a request, our application will handle it and will change it manually from or out automatically from a post to a delete. So we can still use a delete route successfully in our application. So this is how we're going to solve problem number one, and we'll demonstrate that in a second. All right, we're going to add a middleware function that will run before it hits our delete route or any part of our route. In the same way that we've done so far with, say, for example, this bit of middleware. So when you use the method used for the app, you just add a bit of a function that looks the request, does something, and then passes it to the next function. So because this happens first, it is available to any further routers that we use. So we'll use something here that will be like app.use, and inside of here we'll put some middleware that allows us to change requests. Right, and the reason we're doing this is because we have a restriction on the kinds of ways to create a request, and the only way we're creating a request is using a form. Limited forms can only create get or post requests. So this is the way that we're going to handle problem number one. Ordinarily, as we sort of continue in the course, or even in your sort of first jobs, forms won't be the only way you submit HTTP requests. You'll be using asynchronous requests using jQuery, using the fetch library, like back we were doing on the front end. We'll be making more requests like that. But for the moment, we're just dealing with forms as the main way we're submitting requests, and we want to also apply a knowledge or an understanding of convention in how we design applications following this convention. All right, this is what we call RESTful application design. All right, so let me put that buzzword here. Where should I put it? Let me put it here. REST up here. All right. This is all talking about resources and application state. How do we design our application routes so that they are according to a convention with what we want to do? So if I come to any web application, I expect routes to be designed like this accordingly. So let me go ahead and start updating the application to do something like this, and we can see this in action, and then we can tackle problem number two. How do we, after I can submit that successful request, how do we extract the ID from the request? So there's a few things we're going to have to do. The first thing I want to do, as always, is to write a Cypress test. We currently should have, that's the calendar, we currently should have a set of tests that, from what I did earlier this morning. Okay, clearly I have broken something, so let's go have a look. You'll start them back up again, thank you. Let's run you again. Cool. So currently we've got a passing test for creating a cat and showing the current cats. So let's go back to my Cypress test on the right here. All right, so if we call this create and call this read, so we can think about the CRUD actions, the CRUD operations that are happening here. We've got to add another one. I'm going to do the delete one, all right? So this is going to be delete. Specific cat. So this is the test that I'm going to write. I want to create a cat first. I'm going to visit the cat. I'm going to assert that it's already on the page. Then I'm going to what do I want to see? If I diagram it out quickly so you can have a look. What I want to do, I want to see, if I navigate to get/cats, what I want to see on the page in this case is, let's say, for example, I've already added one cat into it. I'll have something like name, owner, breed, some information, and then I'm going to have my form to submit a new cat, create, something like this. So the thing I want to add differently is I want to add a delete button here. That when I click on this, so specifically when I click on this delete button, and I'm going to execute a post request. A post request to /cats with the specific ID. My application at some point will turn this into a delete request. And I'm going to delete it, be redirected back to the cats page, and I'll simply see my form. Great. All right, this is what I want to happen. So far, so good. Are we following? Again, please shout out any questions at the moment, just make sure we're all following what I want to happen. So let's go ahead and write this test. I've got so far the first part where I've created the cat and I see it on the page, and then I want to target that delete button. So let's do something like I'm just going to target it by order. Interesting question here. I'll loop through a bunch of cats. Yeah, let's go on this side. Let's have a look here. So what I want to do is loop through all the cats, and let's actually put all of this inside, nest in another element, indentation. And I'm going to give this an ID of whatever is the first item. So that this map function loops through an array, and I can actually also pass it a second argument, an index, like that. And so I have access to the index, so whichever is the first one. So this is going to be how I'm going to target different parts of my different buttons. So I had multiple cats. I want to be able to distinguish different delete buttons from each other. So if I pass an index and loop through each sort of representation of a cat here, I'll have something like, say it's going to be cat, and then embed some JavaScript here to look at that, and let's do something like so what I want this to be is for the first item in this array, it'll be this here will have an ID of cat-0. For the second one, it'll be cache-1, etc., etc., etc. All right, it'll do for now. So then I can do something like this: get the text that represents the first sort of cat information, and in this case, I also want to have like a delete button. So if I get to this, it means it's not going to appear on the page because I won't find it in a second. I'm going to click the button. Again, I haven't created this element yet, but we will do in a second. I want to assert that it doesn't exist, maybe. Cat0 should not exist, something like this, I think. So I don't want this to exist because I want to delete everything. I go through, I see one item on a page, I delete it, it shouldn't exist on the page. All right, so maybe I can even change this to cat0. So I want to, in my test, target this and assert that the right text is inside of it. I'm going to click on the button, which I haven't written yet, and then I want to say this does not exist. All right. So let's see how far I should get to this part here saying this has failed. All right, if I've done that correctly. Cool. So it finds the cat 0 element, and it failed on the delete button because I haven't written it yet. Cool. So let's go ahead and write our delete button. Now we have to, if we go back to this diagram, we have to be able to create a request. So it has to be a form. So let's create a form. And I'm going to give it an ID because I've got a, no, not here. Let's just get rid of that. I'm going to create the post request. I've got to change it somehow. And this is what we're going to have to think about. I'm going to send it to /cats as always, but I have to send it to something else, right? There has to be some ID here. Now we can get the ID from the cat. Cat always has an ID. We have a look at my table at the moment, select everything from cats. You can see that current ID is 121, right? But each cat has an ID. So I can interpolate or embed JavaScript like I was doing before and have something that says cat.id. Yeah, so the cat I loop through has a name property, a breeder property, an owner property, also has an ID property. So I can send across an ID accordingly. And I'm trying to send it across. I'm saving the problem until later. Actually, how do I extract this on the server side? I'm just trying to think about how I send across the right request, right? Trying to get to this place here. Click on this button, I've got to send the request. The thing that actually will send the request is the submit button. So let's create a submit button with delete. Don't worry about the name. And we need to find a way to change this to be a delete request. So I'm going to go back to my Express documentation for this little bit of middleware that we're going to use. So I'm going to share this in a Discord channel, so we all have access to it. And as it's named, it's going to override that HTTP method from a post request to something that we need it. And specifically, this is the description of it. Let's use HTTP verbs such as put or delete in places where the client doesn't support it, and an HTML form doesn't support making a put or delete request. It's almost as if they specifically designed this a module for this use case. In fact, they did. So how do we use it? Well, we're going to scroll down to this part here, override using a query value. To use a query string value, remember query string is part of the URL that starts after the question mark and is a set of key value pairs. We want to specify the query string as a string argument to the method override function, like so, over here. And then to make the call, send a post request to a URL with the overridden method as the value of that query string. Okay, well, let's understand that for a second. This method of using query value would typically be used in conjunction with HTML forms when trying to support browsers but still use newer methods. So this is pretty much why we're trying to use it. So let's add this to our project. I want to, well, first of all, I need to, we here? Let's go npm install, what's it called? Method override. Okay, and then I've got to require it into my project. Let's go here. No, let's go below here. Const. Okay, require it. And then I tell my app to use it. Like this. Okay. And the example call with a query override using HTML form is I create my form. So let's compare. My form is here. And the action is going to the resource cats, and I'm going to add after it method delete. Method delete. So what's trying to happen is we're going to send across this key value pair, and then in my app, it's saying if you see a key called underscore method, then change it to be that value from opposed to whatever is the value. So in my request, I'm saying change it to be a delete. Or I have to change it to be something else if I wanted to. All right. But essentially just adding a little bit more data to this request, and the application then looks at it and says, okay, we've got to change it. Let's change it from a post to a delete. Let's go back to documentation for a second. Cool. Let's have a look at what's going on. So if that's all good, that means my form will successfully execute a request to this URL. And that means my application needs to handle it. So I'm going to add, a delete route. /cats. And then there's something we have to add here, but we'll do it in a second. I'm going to create a sync request response, and we need to delete a cat stat times, and then after it we're going to redirect back to the get route over here. Okay, so one step at a time, let's figure out how we can add like a parameter to our route here. So let's go to Express documentation and find route parameters. So route parameters are named URL segments that are used to capture the values specified at their position in the URL. The captured values are populated in the request parameters object, rec.params, with the name of the route parameters specified in the path as their respective keys. So for example, if you send a request, if you have a route named in your application /users :user ID, then you have access to user ID in your request.params. If the actual request made is /users 34, because this is in this place, you have access to the key user ID and the value 34. In the same way on the right-hand side, not a second name parameter, you have access to this if you make a request in the right format, and it gets translated into a set of key value pairs for you to use. All right, so if I apply that understanding to here, if I want to say something like, I don't know, let's call this ID. If I add this as a parameter to my route, I have access to request.params.id. Right, this is going to be in my request params object. I can access the property using the dot notation rec.params dot and then whatever is the property here. So I can send across a request that has that data in the request, the ID, and then extract it on the server side. Well, what do I do with it? Well, let's go back to my supervised docs. I'm already at the delete query. Look at that, because I was doing truncate last time, wasn't I? And the delete query is as simple as one of these. Let's take this and let's put it here. Sort out that here. And oh no, go back, please. And I want to make my condition not on the first name, that's the example, and it's not a user, it's a cat. And I want to say not first name, but ID, and I grab the ID back from the request params ID. So let's do that at the top, because comments should always be above the thing that they describe. Let's have a few console log statements. We can actually see this and visually have a look. I'm going to have a look at the request.params. So we can see what comes through in that request. Okay, so let's have a look at my test. Let's run it and see how far we get. Okay, so it didn't find the delete button. Why not? Let's go and have a look. It doesn't have an ID. So let's add an ID to my delete button. It's going to be something like cat, like this, and then delete. Yes, create, read, okay. So can't do this. Why does it show a passing test? That's not very good. Well, I guess that's not a super useful test if I'm just expecting something to not be there, but it's fine at the moment. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how far we got. Let's inspect our server logs. I'm gonna just restart it because it should show me a little bit more information. Okay. So let's see how far we get. I restarted it and now run again. Okay, do we see it in? No, we don't. Okay, so there's going to be something about my request here that hasn't successfully worked. So let's go ahead and look through it. So I send my request, and the error message I'm getting at the moment is that I haven't successfully changed this. So I'm going to go back and have a look at how I've used this. It's probably something that I've missed in the way that it's changed. So let's go back and have a look at the documentation. No, this one. Let's make sure I sent it in the right way. Oh, clearly I've missed the query string. Start the query string. Okay, let's run it again. Cool. All right, so we no longer see it on the page. So let's see it in action. We go through, I truncate the tables, I then create the cat, I then visit it, we'll make the assertion, I grab this area from the page, make the assertions that the text was there, find this button, click it, and you can see that it deletes the data and then reloads the page, and it's not there. So I've successfully made the request, changed it from a post to delete in my application, and then I extracted it. And we can see in the server logs here that I've got my request.params object. This is from this console.log statement. And then gone through and deleted it from the table and then redirected back to cats. Cool. So if we go back to this diagram here, I've created my sort of quick diagram of what I wanted to happen, codified this in a test, written my test, and then had to solve these two problems. How do I change the request from a post to delete, and then how do I extract the data from the request? Cool. So I think this is all that I wanted to do for now. For the update, you have to think about adding a new view. So for an update, I imagine you can do something similar or different if you want to, but for an update, you're going to do something probably slightly similar, where you, let's have a look at this. I'm not going to actually do it myself, but it's something for you to do in your pairs this afternoon or tomorrow. Let's grab all of that, please, over here. Go away. I imagine the first thing you want to do is add like a update or an edit button, or a link, whatever you want to do. And this, when you click on this, I imagine you'll be taken to a new page that has a form. This is one way to do this. You might want to think about different ways of doing this, which has the 3 different input fields and your create button, or I guess you can call this your update now. Update. And then when you click on your update button, this is what's going to make the a post request, which gets changed to a put request to cats, and then whatever is the ID. And then you'll see the new information on the page, etc., etc., etc. So usually the update feature requires another view to add. It's slightly more work involved, so you can add the new information that you want to and then update it. All right. So this request here, when you click on the edit, will take you to a new view that has just the form, and you have to make sure this update button has the right ID. All right, because you want to be able to update the right item. So part of your challenge will be to construct this. All right, so you have to make sure in this request here, you make a request, and that will show you a page with the right IDs. You've got to figure out how you send across the right ID. Show this information on the page, the update button has the right, and then you make the request. So this will be part of the challenge for you to think about. But given that you now have the tools to solve the first problem, which is how do you make sure that your application can send the right kind of request, or change the post request to the verb that you want, and then how do you extrapolate the request, you should be able to now complete the create, read, update, and destroy elements of your application as part of the first few requirements here. Okay. Let me pause here for reflections, thoughts, and questions about what I've demonstrated.
Do we need like a delete button for every specific like line in your database, or is it just like the one that takes from the top kind of thing?
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
So like how you can choose which like row in your database you're deleting. So you're not just deleting like whatever the first one is and then the next first one kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can see in this a list of cats, you have a list of bookmarks, and every delete button gets created when you loop through it. Right, it's part of this loop.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Okay. I'm with you.
And so each button has its own individual URL formed by that ID here.
Right. So yeah,
we can have a look at it if we go to localhost, say for example here, and I can just add in a bunch of information. I'm not paying attention to what they've been called. Just right, it's fine.
Yeah, right.
And then we can inspect the page. You'll see that in the list, there are two individual cat elements. In this cat, there's the text and then also the form, but you can see that the ID, the URL is different. And this is how we've been able to distinguish different delete requests. So when I click on the first button, it will make a request with the ID 134. And with the second one with 135. So that's how we can make sure we delete the right row from the table.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. I didn't realize you got a button with every instance, but it makes sense obviously to do it that way.
Good question. Other questions?
Is there a way to like similar to what we were doing this morning? Is there a way to like reset the ID of the elements in your tables every time you run your tests?
I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. You shouldn't care about the IDs. There probably is a way to your table to reset. But otherwise, yeah, don't worry about it. Let the database take care of making sure all the IDs are unique.
I was thinking, like in that regard, wouldn't it be better to use like the ID instead of the index to, because now you've got that the index is giving 0 and the ID is giving 134.
Yeah. Remember that you won't know what the IDs are. So if you're trying to create tests, you can't really target by ID.
Right. Okay. So yeah.
Yeah. So here it's just the order in which they appear. But when you send the request, you send the request with the ID.
Sure. Okay.
This isn't foolproof, but it's useful for now. All right. Other thoughts and questions? A good question, Ron. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop the recording, upload it to YouTube so you have access to this. And I've shared the two resources in your Discord channel. I'll also push this work onto the same branch that I shared earlier. So you'll have access to this as well. Okie doke. Otherwise, enjoy your pairing. You still have to, you still got one more day for this pairs. We have a new set of pairs tomorrow, so I don't need to do anything.